Hello, this is going to be a video going through the MAE deck that I have been really enjoying and refining over lockdown, and I'm now going to take through, starting with the Voice of Isengard Deluxe expansion and moving through that and through the quests. So I thought it would be cool to have a video just sort of outlining, going through the deck, explaining some of my choices so that I don't feel the need to do that during the video. And for anyone that wants any explanation or deeper look at the deck, they can have a look here. So we're going to start off with the heroes, and since it's called the MAE deck, obviously we're going to start with our boy Mablung. Now he's not a hero that I was ever particularly amazed with. He's obviously got that 2/2/2 array, which is average would be a generous term. You know, when being good at everything isn't really very good in Lord of the Rings, because typically heroes will only be doing one thing a turn. So yes, you can quest averagely and attack averagely and defend averagely. I would say 4 hit points is above average, but you're only really going to get to do one of those things. But Mablung is in here because he's tactics, and the access to the tactics there gives access to some key cards. He's Gondor, which means one of those key cards that we'll see later, Gondorian Shield, means that he goes up to Defense 4, which actually is something worth having. Ranger isn't a keyword I take advantage of, but there are lots of cards that key off that. 10 starting threat is perfectly fine, and his response is really key to running this Tri-Sphere deck, because it's going to be money saving, essentially. After you engage an enemy, add 1 resource to Mablung's resource pool, limit once per phase, and that phase is really key, because typically you will engage things when you get to voluntarily engage, and when things forcibly engage you, it's the same phase. So if you voluntarily engage or are forcibly engaged, you'll only get 1 resource. But there are enemies that do engage you out of sequence, and those are typically awful. But Mablung softens the blow slightly, and he can, he'll generally be generating 2 resources a turn, or could be even more. And if he's not generating resources, it's because you're not seeing enemies, and generally, as this is a solo deck, locations aren't as dangerous because you're not going to get as location locked. So if he's not generating resources, you probably don't need as many resources because you're not seeing the enemies. So really, really good character. Also softens the blow of frustrating characters like those wargs that engage you, and then if they don't get a shadow card, they go back into the staging area. Mablung means you're constantly getting resources from those. So he's not spectacular, but he really, really works well in this deck. I used to have Beregond here, who's a much stronger defender, and also has those really good keywords, and has a good starting threat, and all that sort of jazz, and he can save you a little bit of money, but he wasn't helping me play the allies from tactics that I really wanted to play. So I swapped out for Mablung, and it's worked really well. Next up, Arwen Erestor, who is one of those heroes who I had a hard time sort of believing she was as good as people said. But she's one of these ones that the ability, while not seeming spectacular, is just so good in practice. So she's got 3 will, 1 attack, 2 defense, 3 hit points. So 3 will is exceptional. It's only really characters like Eowyn who are going to be questing for more. 9 starting threat is fantastic. Who cares about the attack and defense? She's never not going to be questing. She's Noldor, great keyword, and Noble comes up occasionally. But again, it's access to the Spirit Sphere, and it's this action. Discard a card from your hand to add 1 resource to a Noldor's hero resource pool or Aragorn's hero resource pool. Limit once per round, not phase. Oh, goodness, if that was phase, it would be broken. So, obviously, that means that she can give the resource to herself, because it's not an other Noldor hero's resource pool. So that means I can have 2 Spirit resources a turn, which, again, this is a Tri-Sphere deck, so that's particularly helpful. As we'll see in a second, I'm never lacking for cards, so she's always going to have fuel for this ability. The biggest downside to Arwen is that it means I can't run Ally Arwen, who is so good. But Hero Arwen is amazing. I used to run Glorfindel here, and obviously he presents a lot of benefits. But the resource generation of Arwen has been incredible, and it's made the Spirit side of the deck so much better. This deck has been quite refined down through a lot of plays. So loving Arwen. And finally, the key component to the MAE deck, Erestor. Erestor, I would have to say now, is probably my favourite Lord of the Rings hero because he has fundamentally changed how I get to play this incredible game. And despite the fact I don't play online, I've played more than 300 physical games at this. Erestor has completely reinvigorated my interest in the game. He's got exactly the same stat line as Mablung, so nothing spectacular. He's got just Noldor, but what a keyword Noldor is. But then one of the best and most interesting hero abilities in the game, if not the most. Draw 3 additional cards at the beginning of the resource phase. At the end of the round, discard all cards in your hand. Oh my goodness, how this changes the game of Lord of the Rings. It doesn't become a strategic game where you draw a card and you think, that will be good at a key moment. Instead, you are playing turn to turn to turn to turn, just rolling with the punches, but drawing 4 cards. Since it's 3 additional cards, you're drawing 4 cards a turn, which is 4 turns worth of draw in Lord of the Rings. He means that you get 10 cards at the start on your first turn. You're never going to lack for cards, and it means that the many abilities in the game that are like discarding cards to do things suddenly come online with Erestor. The average stats means that he can do everything sort of well. Typically, obviously, Mablung becomes a defender, Arwen becomes becomes a quester, and Erestor can fill in whatever gaps needed. He's been in this deck from the very start. As I said, it used to be Glorfindel and Beregond, and it used to be the Beg deck. And Erestor didn't used to be like the MVP. He just facilitated the deck's mechanics and everything went into Glorfindel. But now that we've got Arwen, Erestor is the logical attacker, and so he gets to be quite the hitter at times. So there are my heroes, and obviously gives access to the lore deck, the lore sphere, which without healing, soloing is pretty blooming difficult. So we're going to go through the 3 card types that are in the deck. These are the allies. We've got 27 allies. I'm running a 50-card deck because the idea of running anything bigger disgusts me. So we're going to go through them. Probably won't spend as long as we did on the heroes, but does depend on the ally. So first of all, we have 3 copies of the Galadriel Weaver. Shocking stats: 1 will, 0 everything else, 1 hit point, can't attack or defend, but you're playing them for their ability. After they enter play, you shuffle the top card of your discard pile into your deck. This is so key to balancing out Erestor, as he can burn through deck. He can mean you lose key cards, and the Galadriel Weavers shuffle them back in to come back out. They also mean that at a pinch you can shuffle back in key events to see again. 1 cost for 1 will isn't shocking. They are absolutely great. Worst comes to worst, they can be arrow fodder. They're a great thing to remove from the quest if required. They're just a really neat, helpful little card. I don't actually have anything in the deck that keys off Sylvan, but these guys, they're not so good that I can't afford to burn them if I have to on a turn to do other things, but the amount of times that these have saved me having to panic over, oh no, I've drawn my Will of the Wests early. I always make sure Will of the West goes on the top, and the Galadriel Weaver takes care of it for me. So Galadriel Weaver, absolutely great. A more recent addition to this deck is Galdor of the Havens. Very expensive at 4 cost for 2 will, 2 attack, 1 defense, and 4 hit points. But we're not miles off like the quality of some of my heroes in terms of stats. But it's his response that we want. After 1 or more cards discarded from your hand, draw a card, limit once per round. This means that when you're using the many abilities that I have in this deck to discard cards, you're drawing more cards. You're getting through your deck quicker, and most of the time, the only cards that can be an issue on is Will of the West, and you just don't do it if that's in a particularly dangerous situation. It means you get more cards to power up more of the abilities that we're seeing. Great stats, and the fact that he's Noldor, obviously it will come as no surprise that I've got to the sea in the deck, so I can burn cards to play Noldors the cheaper. So even though I'm only running a Tri-Sphere deck, so in theory generating 1 or 2 lore resources if I use Arwen, Galdor's not that hard to get out, and he's been really, really helpful, giving the deck a lot more flexibility. Glorfindel, he used to be a hero in the deck, then he got phased out, and then I finally picked up the cycle that he's in, and now there's a one-of hero in the deck. Incredible stats: 3 will, 3 attack, 1 defense, 4 hit points. Unbelievably expensive at 5 cost, but he can be played from your discard pile. So I will always burn him when I see him, and then I will play him Later on, when either my spirit resources have built up to a ridiculous degree, which almost never happens, or much more likely, I have to the sea, which lets me burn cards to play Glorfindel. And the action as well, discard a card to ready Glorfindel once per phase, so that means you get his will and his attack. You're getting 2 incredible stats, like a hero-level ally, who's actually really playable in this deck, and this deck's biggest weakness of throwing away cards at the end of their turn is no problem to Glorfindel. Another card that I picked up recently, and I'm not certain, I used to run a few more of them, but I peeled it back down to just the one, Guardian of Rivendell. 3 cost, 1 will, 2 attack, 3 defense, 3 hit points. Importantly, later in the cycle, there's quite a few things that do single hit point damage, so those, I used to love Defenders of Ramas, but they would just get bowled over, whereas Guardian of Rivendell can actually take a bigger hit than the Defender of Ramas and survive. It's also got a bit of flexibility with its attack, and all importantly, it is neutral, which means I'm not beholden to any particular resource in my split try deck. It does have the downside as an additional cost to play the Guardian of Rivendell from your hand. You must discard 2 cards from your hand, which would usually be hideously prohibitive. That would be 2 turns worth of draw. But for me, that's half the cards I draw in a turn. So I've just left the one of them in because I do think that they've got some real meat to them. They're the sort of ally who you're not going to throw under the bus. They can actually take the sort of hit you'd almost want a hero to take. But we've all had those times where you're like, oh, if that enemy gets 2 more attack, my hero's dead. This ally is perfect. If that enemy doesn't get that +2 attack, he just takes some wounds. If he does get the +2 attack, I've lost an expensive ally, but that's infinitely better than losing a hero. Oh, one of the MVPs of solo play. I will always put this card in every solo deck I run. If I had more copies of it, even though it's unique, I would put more of them in, but I only own 1 core set. Henmath River Song, 1 cost. Who gives a monkey what your stats are, because your action is godlike. Action, exhaust Henmath River Song to look at the top card of the encounter deck. Ridiculously useful. There'll be so many, Lord of the Rings is essentially a blackjack game of how much can you afford to send questing and how much do you need to hold back. Henmath turns that from guesswork into mathematical work. You can see exactly what's coming up. So, there's no enemies in front of me. There's no enemies in the staging area. Do I need to hold back my defenders? Let's see what's coming next. Another location. No, let's just all go, get loads of progress this turn. You can spot treacheries that deal 1 damage for every exhausted character. Well, in that case, let's only send the characters who don't exhaust. Let's not send anyone who'll die. Henmath is absolutely I will do anything I can to play this card. He changes the game fundamentally. Maybe not in a way that it was intended, but it works out so well for me. Right then, much like Mablung, this was a card that I did not grasp how ridiculously good it was. Honor Guard, 2 cost, 0 will, 0 attack, 1 defense, 3 hit points, which are a really subtle strength of this card, and then response, exhaust Honor Guard to cancel 1 point of damage just dealt to a character, and the Valor response, which I have done once or twice, exhaust and discard the Honor Guard to cancel up to 5 points of damage just dealt to a character. The Honor Guard are so good. I thought this was just poor man's healing. I was so wrong. We've all had times where our defender comes out, the enemy does 6 points of damage, and that would be a dead Mablung. Okay? Just by cancelling a single point and meaning that that hero is not dead, then you can focus on healing them. These guys got even better when archery comes in, because not only can they cancel the archery damage if it's low enough and there's nothing else you need to block, but they can also 3 hit points. You can punt these guys full of arrows. That's a lot of hit points by an ally standard. When you have a suite of these out, preventing 3 points of damage is unbelievably good, especially since Mablung can't have the Raven-winged helm that Beregond used to run, and blocking damage is just exceptional. These are absolutely fantastic. I'm always heartbroken when I get them at a point where I can't play them, but as Mablung is typically making 2 resources per turn, we can get these guys out. They are absolutely fantastic. Related to them, if you can't block it, heal it. This is another recent addition. I used to run Warden of Healing. I've changed over to the Imladris Caregiver. The Warden of Healing is just absurdly good, but the Imladris Caregiver has a couple of advantages. First, he hasn't got 1 hit point, which means he doesn't get wiped out by 1 hit point damage to all characters' treacheries. He's got a willpower, and he doesn't need to exhaust to do his healing, so technically he can do something else helpful. He's also Noldor, so at a pinch, I can play him for cheaper. Discard a card from your hand to heal 1 damage to any character, limit twice per round. I mean, the Warden of Healing is just exceptionally better than that, being able to heal 2 characters for 1 point, though it does exhaust him, which can cause timing issues. So I've tried these guys out, and I enjoy their flexibility a little bit more than the Warden of Healing, plus I'm just a bit bored with the Warden of Healing. Right, this chap, I've never run in this deck before, but I'm putting him in for this cycle. I'm a big fan of Linda in a normal deck. 3 cost, 2 will, 1 attack, 2 defense, 2 hit points. Not great exchange in the spirit, but Noldor, so of course we can get him out for cheaper. And then response, after Lindir enters play, if you have less than 3 cards in hand, draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. You might be thinking, why on earth do we need more card draw in this deck? Well, there are quite a few things that burn a lot of cards. And I have had those turns where I'm like, oh my goodness, I need more cards. This means I'll get to see through my deck quicker. He's Noldor, so he's cheap. He gives a bit more will. I think he might work out. But we'll see. It's not a forced response, so wouldn't need to do it in negative situations. Right then, the Assault Force. Oh my goodness, the Mithlond Sea Watcher. 2 cost, 1 will, which is not inconsequential, because as I said with River Song, if there are times where you know there aren't enemies coming out, this character can quest. 1 attack, nothing spectacular, 0 defense, 2 wounds. Really useful, because so many of these elven archers have got like 1 wound. 2 wounds makes a world of difference. Noldor, so they can come out for cheaper. Warrior. While the top card of your discard pile is an ally, Mithlond Sea Watcher gets +2 attack and gains ranged. Obviously the ranged is almost always useless, apart from those stupid enemies that can only be attacked by range, which is a horrible design mechanic. But spending 2 resources for 3 attack, and all you have to do is have an ally on top of your discard pile. And in this deck that discards cards constantly, it's easy to control our discard pile. These are fantastic. It is not very difficult to get 3 of these in play with Mablung generating 2 resources a turn and the amount of cards you're drawing, and you can throw out 9 damage a turn. That is Ring Wraith levels of murder. The Mithlond Sea Watchers have been absolutely fantastic, and it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous card. Which doesn't hurt when you're playing this game all the time. Another big hitter, Quick Beam, the first, but certainly not the last, of the Ents. 2 cost, 2 will, 3 attack, 1 defense, 3 hit points. I mean, those stats are absolutely absurd for that cost. Of course, he's an Ent, so he can't have restricted attachments, and he enters play exhausted, but after he enters play, you can deal a damage to him to ready him. Quick Beam is absolutely brilliant. He is an easy turn 1. I can have no resources from the previous turn, get my basic 1 on Erestor, use Arwen, and I can play Quick Beam in a turn. He gives me 2 will, 3 attack. He's not going to survive anything in terms of getting attacked. But 3 attack for 2 cost in the Lore Sphere is bananas. And, as I said, he's not the last Ent, so there's no prizes for guessing which Ent is going to be coming up soon. I used to run 3 of these, Sylvan Refugees, at 1 cost for 2 will that can't do anything else with 1 hit point, and after a character leaves play, discard the Sylvan Refugee from play. This deck doesn't do a massive amount of sacrificial lambing, as I call it, where you just throw allies under the bus, because the game really does punish you for that later down the cycles. So I wasn't having to clear all these guys out, but I have found that they are the sort that you can suddenly lose such a huge chunk of willpower that I've taken it down to just the 1. And I'm going to see how that works out, because 1 cost for 2 willpower is insane. If you just think of it as an event, you play it 1 turn, you get 2 willpower, and it's gone the next turn. That wouldn't be shocking. And if this manages to linger around, I mean, they're such a powerhouse of efficiency. And there's a lot of spirit cards in this deck that need to get played, so anything that's cheap is good. Another card that has flirted in and out of the deck, and I'm going to give it another roll. 3 cost at skin bark, 3 cost, 0 will, love a card with 0 will. I know that sounds odd, but there are very few instances in the game that care if you have 0 will. It does come up though, but there are very few instances that do care. And why do I want to pay for 1 will on a character like Skinbark, who is just in this deck to do one thing? 4 attack, the 3 cost is absurd. 2 defense and 3 hit points means he's no pushover. He's an Ent, which means he can't have restricted attachments, and he enters play exhaust. While he's attacking alone against an orc enemy, that enemy does not count its defense. Meh. The ability's fine. If it comes up, grand. But 3 costs for 4 attack. He's just a really sturdy single card addition to the deck. And I was finding that my financial situation in this deck was really good. So I've splashed out on a single hitter. And that financial situation is only improved by the broken god tier ally that is Treebeard, a card so good that you could put it in a deck with no Ents and it would still be ridiculously broken. 4 cost, which sounds expensive but is the biggest steal in this entire game. 2 will, 4 attack, 3 defense, 5 hit points. He's an Ent, can't have restricted attachments, enters play exhausted. He collects 1 resource each resource phase, and these can be used to pay for Ent cards played from your hand. That would warrant his inclusion without the action that is pay 2 resources from Treebeard's pool to ready an Ent character. So if you're not seeing your Ents, if your Ents are all dead, whatever, Treebeard means, well, he can just act twice. It's not even any other Ent character. Treebeard can pay to multi-activate himself. And with 2 will, 4 attack, 3 defense and 5 hit points, you're going to want to multi-use him. And he's neutral, so he's easy to play. And even though I'm only generating 3 resources a turn because of Arwen, I can play him in 1 turn, which is ridiculous. So the obligatory Ents now, 2 Wandering Ents, who feel very Mablung and Erestor in their 2/2/2. Really useful flexibilities in this card. Amazing against archery. Not sacrificial lambs. They could actually take a hit from a non-superpowered enemy, but they're also cheap enough that, you know what, if you have to throw them under the bus, it's not the end of the world. And also 2 Wellinghall Preservers, 3 cost, which is expensive, but Arwen helps make them cheaper because she can give Erestor resources. Treebeard helps make them cheaper. 3 will is ridiculous for 3 cost in lore. That's just exceptionally good. The 2 attack and 2 defense doesn't hurt, but these guys will not be attacking and defending unless something has gone horribly wrong. Can't have restricted attachments, enters play exhausted, and after they ready, heal 1 damage from an Ent character. This lovely little trickle healing makes Ents even better at getting shot by arrows, and lets characters like the Wandering Ent, Skinbark, Treebeard defend a bit more readily against those enemies that are going to do a little bit of chip damage, and they can even heal the wound that Quick Beam takes when he comes in and readies himself. So those are my allies. I did used to run a lot of Elven Jewelers. I've peeled them out, but I am thinking about putting maybe 1 in, but I've got to take something out. We'll see. Right then, attachments. There are a lot of attachments in this deck. Elven Spear, a card that I used to absolutely despise, but of course when it's 0 cost in a deck that draws as many cards as this, it's fine. Attached to a Noldor or Sylvan hero, so obviously this goes on to Erestor. It's restricted. Discard a card from your hand to give attached hero +1 attack until the end of the phase. Limit 3 times per phase, because this was made after they realised how broken Lorien Protector was, so they didn't need to errata it. This means, along with a card that we'll be seeing later, Rivendell Blade, that if you need to, you can essentially get Erestor up to 7 attack. It's really good if you've ended up somehow in this deck that loves to discard cards. If you've ended up with cards in your hand, you can make Erestor that little bit more dangerous. With it being 0 cost, you can play at any time. It's a one-off inclusion because I often don't have the spare cards at the end of the turn to play it, but it's pretty helpful. A mandatory 3 of in the Gondorian Shield, possibly one of the best cards ever put into the game. 1 cost tactics, attached to a hero, restricted, limit 1 per hero, attached hero gets +1 defense, +2 if instead the attached hero has the Gondor trait. Turns Mablung from a 2 defense, you're going to die the second anything hits you, into a 4 defense, respectable defender. Absolutely essential, will always play regardless of what else I have in my hand with Mablung's resource. And then, of course, the nice thing is, I'm not really going to put one of these onto Erestor because he has other restricted attachments he needs to have. Arwen, same sort of problem. But these two don't become dead cards because this deck has so many ways to discard cards for value, so that the duplicates don't bother me. Right, 1 Lembas. I used to run a lot more Lembas in this deck. I ummed and ahed about taking the Lembas out and putting in a third Imradris healer, but because this doesn't require a card to use and it readies, and it can heal 3 for that like burst healing. I'm thinking back to the old Bridget armor pack from Overwatch. Can be really, really powerful. I love putting this onto Mablung, putting him against a decent enemy. The enemy hits him, wounds him, he spends this, he heals himself, and he's ready for another hit. Just a really useful back pocket thing that's not essential to play all the time, but lovely to play when you've got the luxury. I've actually taken Lighter Valinor down to just 2 copies. Obviously, this used to be the lifeblood of the deck when I was running Glorfindel. Now it's just a handy way for a Erestor to get to do multiple things in a turn. One of absolutely essential for most Noldor decks, but really Erestor, it's fine if he only does one thing. This is just a neat way to get his 2 will on a quest as well. I might take them even lower, but it's so hard for me to kick the habit of feeling like that is an absolutely essential card. Protector of Lorien. A card that's good usually. In this deck, it's absurd. Attached to a hero, discard a card from your hand to give attached hero +1 defense or +1 will until the end of the phase. Limit 3 times as it was errated. You put one of these onto Erestor, it means he can quest for 5 if needs be, or he can defend for 5. You can even put the extra one onto Mablung if you need a godlike defender. These are just unbelievably good cards that give so much flexibility and mean that you are never going to waste cards, because worst comes to worst, you can use them to power up the character's will. 2 Rhythmdale Blades. I really would feel more comfortable with 3, but we'll see. I absolutely adore this card, and it feels so elven. 1 cost, attached to a Noldor or Sylvan character. It's restricted. When the attached character attacks an enemy, that enemy gets -2 defense until the end of the phase. Means that Erestor essentially attacks for 4. Most enemies have 2 or more defense. Really makes him a useful attacker. Really thinking that I might need 3 of them, but the deck does have quite a lot of recursion. A card that I've not used in this deck before, but I'm thinking of throwing in because it seems like it would really suit the deck. Silver Harp, 2 cost, attached to a Spirit Hero, restricted. Response: after a card is discarded from your hand, exhaust Silver Harp to return that card to your hand. Essentially, I was finding that I was actually almost running out of cards in hand to use for all my abilities. This will make Arwen ridiculously good, and I think it might work. It might be a bit expensive. We'll see. If it doesn't work out, I'll take it out. Spear of the Citadel, attached to a tactics character, restricted, limit 1 per character. After the attached character is declared as a defender, deal 1 damage to the attacking enemy. It's a neat bit of chip damage. This deck can struggle to do damage at times, so this can be useful for finishing things off. It's not essential. It's nice if I can play it on Mablung, but whereas the Gondorian Shield is essential, this is just a bonus. But it means he's got his 2 restricted attachments, which I kind of feel like you kind of want on most heroes that are actually going to be doing something. Steed of Imradris. This was a recent addition attached to a Spirit or Noldor hero, restricted, so obviously this is going on Arwen. After the attached hero commits to a quest, discard a card from your hand to place 2 progress on the active location. So good for even if you just see that as simply +2 will for a card, that's good, but there are so many locations that you can clear out even when your questing's going badly, or locations that you really don't want the effect on the board once you go into the quest phase. Just such a useful card. Tempted to put more than 1 copy of it in, but it's been really hard to decide what to keep in this deck and what not, so it might be refined. A later inclusion in this, something I put in when I was doing the Gravehaven Dream Chaser cycle, which felt very appropriate, and has really changed my deck. To the Sea. 2 copies, attached to a Noldor character. It usually ends up going on Arwen, because why not? Action: exhaust to the sea, and discard X cards from your hand to reduce the cost of the next Noldor ally played this phase by X to a minimum of 1. Makes those Glorfindels, Galdors, Lindirs so much cheaper, and even the 2 costs. If you've already used your ability to give somebody else a resource, you can essentially discard more cards to make them even cheaper. So useful. Unexpected Courage, just a luxury card to put onto Mablung so he can multiple defend if needs be. Not as essential in this deck as it used to be, but still handy. And I can't imagine making a deck without it. And then Wingfoot, which is a bit of a luxury. Maybe I don't need it. Obviously, this goes onto Mablung. I said I wasn't taking advantage of the Ranger trait. This was a late inclusion. After the attached hero... Oh, so I didn't even explain Unexpected Courage because it's such like an obvious card. But attached to a hero, exhaust Unexpected Courage to ready the attached hero. So you get 2 uses out the hero. Means Mablung can defend multiple times. Yeah, can be useful. And Wingfoot, attached to a Ranger hero. After the attached hero commits to a quest, name enemy, location, or treachery. If the card of the named type is revealed during the quest phase, ready the attached hero. It means that Mablung can contribute his 2 willpower to the quest. When Henmath Rithersong is in play, he can do it without any fear. And there can even be situations where you don't have an enemy in front of you, so you simply name enemy, because if an enemy comes out, then Mablung will ready, and if an enemy doesn't come out, you don't need him to ready. You know, it's always nice to feel like you're getting more value out your heroes, but I'm not certain it's needed, but it's so pretty. I'm a sucker for multiple actions. So there are all the attachments. Fear not, because the events in this deck are very minimal, because obviously I'm discarding my hand at the end of every turn, and most events tend to be this will be really helpful in this situation. Well, what if that situation doesn't come up before the end of the turn? So there are many obvious events, even ridiculous things like Feint, which I would feel like I would always take in a tactics deck. I haven't included here because, well, I might draw it on a turn where I don't see any enemies, or on a turn where I don't actually want to spend 1 resource to cancel an attack from an enemy because I can take it easily. So these are I've really had to limit myself down to essentially cards that I will always want to play whenever I see them. And if you're like me, there's 1 spirit card that every time you see Elrond's weird waxy face on this card, you're happy. Elrond's Council, 0 cost. Player action: if you control a unique Noldor character, not a problem. Give another character +1 will until the end of the phase and lower your threat by 3. Goodness gracious, how amazing these are. I don't bother with Gladrun's Greetings because these are 0 cost. They eliminate 3 threat in a solo player game. Giving you +1 will as well is exceptional. And once I cycle through my deck and see these again, they are always welcome. I used to just run 6 events. I've now put in an Elven Light. I read an article making me think I really should use this card because I was really unwowed by it, but then I thought back to how I felt about Arwen. It's 1 cost, but it can only be played from your discard pile. The action: return Elven Light to your hand from your discard pile, then draw a card. But you've also put this card in your hand. So for a deck like mine that wants to discard cards all the time, this is essentially putting 2 into your hand. Obviously, this isn't going to always be played. I found resources with Arwen really restrictive, but there might be times, and there have been times, where just being able to draw 1 more card would have been amazing, or to put 2 more cards into my hand to power up something with discards. And then the other 3, as I said, I only have 1 core set, so even though this card says Dwarven Tomb, if you look really closely, it actually says Will of the West. I used to just run a Dwarven Tomb, but I just decided I was only ever using it for Will of the West anyway, so why not just essentially cheat and count it as a Will of the West. Will of the West, 1 cost event, action: choose a player, shuffle that player's discard pile back into his deck. This is the card that makes Erestor have almost no weakness, because even when you think you've run out of cards, Will of the West will bring them back. Does mean I have to be careful at times with my Arwen resources, but obviously it's only 1 cost. Oh, and it was errated that once it's played, it's removed. So I can only fully recycle my deck 3 times. Yeah, that's the deck. It's crazy that talking about the deck, even though I've played with this deck so many times now, it's crazy that talking about it makes me immediately excited to play with this deck again. It changes so much. You're thinking turn to turn to turn to turn to turn. Each turn is a new puzzle. How best can I use these cards? Weirdly, I came up with this deck around the same time as Marvel Champions came out, and it plays quite a bit like that game, except Lord of the Rings, which I massively prefer. So hopefully we'll have a few quests coming up soon, and hopefully they'll go well. All right, thank you very much. See you in the next video.